Welcome to New Wave Global, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Asad Ijaz, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by Waqar Masood Khan Sahab, former Finance Secretary of Pakistan. I think he was perhaps the longest serving Finance Secretary of Pakistan, and by virtue of that role, he oversaw many budgets. He was part of the budgeting exercise, getting demands from line ministries, consolidating those demands, forming them into separate budgetary line items, and then putting those budgets out for the review and presentation in the Pakistani parliament. So that's perhaps the process that he's followed over the years, and the process has remained pretty much the same, even though there are many calls for reforms. Today, I'd like to speak to him about Pakistan's recent budget. One reason this budget has become extremely important, and all regional players have been following Pakistan's budget because of the Pahalgam story, where the Indian narrative was that Pakistan's economy is struggling, and then Pakistan would gradually increase its military spending, which is why the budget came into spotlight. While we'd not delve into some of those accusations from the Indian side, we'd sort of get into the nitty gritty of this budget, Pakistan's budgeting philosophy, how it's been budgeting over the years, and what reforms have been proposed. We'll also try to understand some budgeting heads with Waqar Masood Khan Sahab, because there's none better than him to really educate us about how the budget is made and how the allocations are placed into different categories in the budget. But let me first welcome him. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Most welcome.
Sir, I'd like to start with the budgetary process in Pakistan. I mean, similar processes are followed in many developing nations across the world, something called incremental budgeting. Is Pakistan's budget also incremental, and has it remained incremental, or do you think that there are some reforms that have been proposed to it in the recent past?
I don't think there is a use of this term incremental, and it really depends what circumstances are and what are the needs to be met. Obviously, there is constantly a need for fiscal consolidation. And when you approach the budgetary process from the point of view of consolidation, then there are many activities which will not get anything. At most, they'll get what they already have. So there is no increment as such. Primarily, the budget is made based on, and whether there is a fund program or not is a very, very important thing. And they do take it very seriously and would play a pivotal role in its final shape.
You mentioned the fund program, sir. There are accusations that this is an IMF budget, and I think this term started coming up in 2019 when one of the opposition parties accused the then government of forming a budget exactly in line with the demands of the IMF. And I think subsequent budgets since 2019 have been blamed of a lot of a strong IMF footprint. Do you think that the recent budget was also exactly in line with the demands of the fund?
By the way, this is not 2019. This process is as old as the history of IMF programs in the country. And I count real economic programs supported by IMF from 1988. So whenever there is a program, there are periods in which there is no program, and then you are entirely at your own and you don't have to get anything from IMF by way of their concerns or with consultation with them. So there is nothing strange about the fact that a budget is IMF supported. In fact, in a way, IMF is supporting funding of the budget. So if the budget has foreign components, because debt servicing you make out of it, and then if you are borrowing foreign resources, even then it comes in resource part, and repayments are part of your expenditures. So the fund program essentially is to ensure that the fiscal stance is sustainable. And then obviously they look for the evolution of public debt, its path, and then they determine whether it is sustainable or not. And in fact, it's not just 0 and 1 as far as sustainability is concerned. They say that how stressed would be the economic conditions in case you are carrying excessive burden of debt servicing. So, I mean, they have a stake, to be fair, and because of that, you coordinate and you get their consent to a particular shape of the budget. So, I mean, that if you have a program, that is a natural thing.
Right. And I'm trying to understand Pakistan's budgetary process also. How are, I mean, like you said, that budgets outside of a fund program have also, if I'm correctly comprehending what you said, budgets outside of the fund program have not been significantly dissimilar. But if I try to understand the budgetary process, how are demands taken from line ministries and how are they sort of consolidated, and then how are they placed within different categories in the budget, like running of the civil government, pensions, defense spending, and so on, and the PSDP, of course. And has there any reforms been proposed to it in the recent past?
Government has perhaps in 2019 or 2020, they passed a Public Finance Management Act,
Right.
which was a very, very important move and had a great deal of implications for budget management,
Right.
because now it has become statutory requirement. So people are careful, but a huge amount of reforms were required as you implement it. They cannot be done as easily as you may have thought. Any change, however small, you want to implement, then you have to sort of bring in new dyes, new frames, new mindset. This reform, this new act, has imposed a great deal of changes in financial management, budget management. I think we are still continuing that process. Now, coming back to what you were asking, how these heads are made out or formulated. Look, this process is going on for time immemorial. Not immemorial literally, because about more than 100 years. Because our framework of budget making, really, we have inherited from our colonial legacy. And it's the same thing in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, some changes. But effectively, those expenditure heads were determined. But there is financial procedure. If you want to add new heads or want to delete, that's all possible.
Right.
and we do it depending on the need. Are empowered, and whenever a need arises of making expenditures not classified in one of the approved heads, then you can create a new head and make the expenditure afterward. So the system of and budgetary process is very. I mean, now it's routine in the sense that in around late January, early February, you send a budget call letter
Yeah.
to all ministries and then ask them to make their budgets and also make any new item of expenditure, NIE form or something. I don't remember what was the term for that. So that has to be separate, that incremental thing that you would happen. So if anybody is asking for an incremental thing, they better identify that this is incremental and justify
Right.
why this should be done. So this is budgetary process in a nutshell. If you have any other question on this, I'll be happy to take.
Sir, the reason I call it incremental is because the public finance literature basically contrasts between two things. One is this zero-based budgeting, and the other is this incremental budgeting. So with zero-based, as you would know better than me, that you zero out all expenditures in the next fiscal year and then start from ground up. With incremental, you use the previous year's as a baseline, and then you start from that baseline. So even if it's like is like a disincrement, even then I think it would be still. I could be wrong about this, but people still call it incremental budgeting, right?
I agree, but you see, so far we have talked about it a great deal. But when it comes to the brass tack, because you see, government is a huge
It's a huge animal.
structure, a huge animal, huge structure.
Yeah.
And for us to inject the same amount of enthusiasm and commitment to reform in the hearts and minds of other people is not easy. Despite we enjoying a great deal of authority in the process. So the zero thing, and zero thing cannot happen if your budget calendar is end January, early February. If you really have to do zero budgeting, then you have to start much earlier, maybe 1 or 2 years early, and then you have time and you can go for every single item and challenge people to justify. But it has not happened. We have not succeeded in carrying out a zero budgeting approach. So we, in that sense, incremental is what we continue to do.
I was speaking to Nadeemul Haq Saab, the famous Pakistani economist, a couple of days ago, and he was also on my show. And he said two things about the budget, the Pakistani budget. One, of course, he's been saying this for a long time, sir, that it's a bureaucratic exercise and it's an exercise in political patronage, and there's a rent-seeking behavior. So every year, at the time of budgets, it's like, a lot of lobbyists and actors get together and they sort of distribute those rents amongst each other. And he says that because it's a bureaucratic exercise, there's no point discussing budgets because they don't change anything and it's not a reform or a policy. So stop taking it like a reform. And the other thing he said was that because, budgeting is all about numbers, he says that I'm from the Chicago school and I'm more interested in the reality that those numbers try to sort of signify. But he says that the economic reality is not changing. So there's no point, fudging numbers or presenting new kind of numbers based on what the IMF says. How do you see those two opinions by Nadeemul Haq Saab? Do you think that budgets must be disregarded and should not be paid the amount of attention we pay to them?
Well, actually, I think there is a truth in saying that there is rent seeking, and then there are um, there is influence peddling. People are approaching different authorities to
Right.
expect something out of the budget. So, in some ways, budget is a political document, right? Even if I suppose there is no fund program for a moment, so we look at if IMF enters, we look at that how its entry affect. Now, so barring IMF's presence, look at the budget. And, I'm a bureaucrat, and obviously I'm a permanent employee. So my job is to give expert advice,
Right.
right? And I have done an expert's job in drawing up the initial recommendations because my process starts 6 months in advance. So when I bring in a document for the parliament to approve, prior to that, I go to my principals, finance minister, the prime minister, and other heavy-duty ministers who have large claims on budgetary resources. So they would all be. Now, I will go and advocate for fiscal consolidation
Right.
because you don't want that any amount of expenditure is acceptable. Because if people are asking you for expenditure, then they should identify additional resources. In the absence of that, if I still insist on making those expenditures, then I am soiling the budget deficit.
Right.
And budget deficit is something which is an economic evil, right? Because this would mean whatever loanable funds are available in the market, because the deficit means that I'm going and borrowing, right? So if I go beyond a certain reasonable limit, then market I would get all loans, and I will get all loans at any interest rate.
And that includes
That-
external debt also, sir?
No, that you cannot do, right? We're talking of basically
Right. I
rupee
wanted
debt.
you to clarify that for my audience.
Yes, very good. आपने अच्छा हुआ, you had made it, you clarified. You obviously foreign debts that you are not in a position to secure except through your merit and your appeal to financial institutions who you go and contract this purpose. So, I mean, I despite all the allegations or accusations that this is IMF is not here, you will say this is a budget of oligarchs and so
Yeah.
forth. Well, I mean, as a finance secretary, I am unaffected by the vested interest. My job is to let the prime minister, finance minister, let them know what is the right thing to do, how much deficit you maybe some basis points are always give and take, but something like 5% is acceptable to me, and somebody says no, let's take it to 8%. Now that's a phenomenal sum, and to go and get that sum from the market means that you would be crowding out the private sector. They will not be able to get that. And if this is excessive demand, then market would be charging a higher interest rate for providing me this.
Also, you're putting pressure on the next year's budget also, or the expenditure side. So for each year you're more under debt, right, sir?
So, and look at your economic outlook will be diluted, and it would be affected. Your growth would be affected because of these things. So Nadeem has points, but I mean, there's so much for a good economic manager to do on the job, and despite the fact that at the end of the day it is political economy that decides, you cannot help in that. Even if I have a very, very solid based on great economic theories and argument, if politics comes in, then that argument is gone, and the thing is decided based on Prime Minister's ability to pass the budget from the Parliament, for instance.
Sir, there is a head in the budget called grants, and people have been wondering, what it finances. I mean, there's a separate head for pensions, then there's a separate head for the PSDP, then subsidies, and then perhaps the running of the civil government. What is that grant head, and what kind of grants has it historically been financing in Pakistan, and has that ever been questioned or subjected to any kind of reforms? Because we've been hearing about reforms to the PSDP, to the pensions, and so on and so forth, but that takes a large chunk of the budget.
Every state has certain expenditures,
right,
that it does not disclose. So it belongs to that category.
Yeah. Is that your answer, sir?
Yeah. And again, this is transparent. It is there.
Right.
So it is. Look, I mean, alhamdulillah, our financial system from that point of view is very solid, in the sense that nothing can escape going to the consolidated fund.
Right.
Every revenue has to be credited. So we have one account. We cannot have accounts which we can sort of hide from the budgetary process. No, all accounts are there, and the Parliament can ask any questions, and then obviously you have to answer those things. Similarly, no expenditure can be made except by debiting our consolidated fund. So we have an account where all revenues go and all expenses are met from the same account.
And so each province also has a provincial consolidated fund?
Similarly, exactly, identical. In fact, there was attempt to do it for the local government also, but somehow the provinces don't like the idea of local governments.
Yeah, so for that, each district would have like a separate assignment count, right? Is that the idea?
Yes, 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 yes.
And do you support that idea, sir? Or do you think that that would be like a very messy financial structure to sort of maintain?
Look, I mean, State Bank manages millions of accounts.
Yeah, yeah,
So if you have, if, presently you have four provincial and federal government, and in federal government has two, public accounts and consolidated fund. Provinces भी होंगे, तो 10 अकाउंट ये हैं, और अगर some 90-100 districts in the government in the country, this is no big deal. But you cannot allow local governments, if they have revenues, to keep them in their pocket or in their personal account. And
yeah.
this is public money, has to be kept in a public account.
Right. So the kind of taxes that local governments generally collect in Pakistan, I'm just intrigued by this now because I've never thought about this. What account do they go to? Something like Abiana, for instance. Where does it go?
Oh, until if they don't have, it all goes to the provincial government
Right.
account.
Right. Provincial governments remind me of another thing I wanted to ask you, sir. Punjab presented its budget, and we all know that after the 18th Amendment, provinces have excess funds, and it presented um, um, a no additional tax budget, and they said that all taxes would be maintained, and we would not be levying any more uh, taxes. And this is, of course, against the spirit that the IMF is following in the federal government, or the spirit that the federal government is following based on the IMF demands, where they're adding new taxes, it's heavily taxed, and then you're also curtailing expenditures, something that economists call a contractionary fiscal policy. But then my question is, do you think, some economists in Pakistan are saying that you should not tax more, especially the salaried class is overtaxed, but you should just curtail expenditures, which is not exactly a contractionary fiscal policy. Do you support that idea that no new taxes should be added, but we should curtail expenditures to the point that we could bring the budget deficit under 5%, as you said?
Well, that is what is happening in this budget also.
Right.
You will find both the things. You're raising revenues overall. Revenues are around 16% or so. They are rising. The net revenues are in excess of 11.6 trillion or so. And our expenditures have fallen by some 17%. So that's we are, and if I can use this occasion to basically underline that this budget that we have, it essentially is in the background of last 2 years or so with the interim government back in mid 23, I think August, month of August 2023. So there were many things done since then. Like the inflation was running around 40%, and we have come down to zero or negligible or 3-4%. But somehow State Bank is not lowering interest rates. So that's a different subject. Similarly, you see this year, current account is in surplus.
Right.
So we are not facing any pressure on our external account, which is typical of us when we go to IMF. Exchange rate is stable. and you cannot find this stability in the recent past.
Right.
I mean, for more than a year, it was 278. And even if it has moved a bit, so 280, 282, it's in that range. Remittances, mashallah, you are hoping that they would be 38, 39 billion dollars,
Right.
which is a phenomenal increase. There is so much talk about smuggling being eliminated. I would not claim that there is no smuggling, but there comes a point in which smuggling becomes a norm.
Smuggling of the dollar, you mean, sir, right?
No, smuggling, because that
Of
affects
goods?
our
Okay.
reserves. Okay, so and obviously that the exchequer gets nothing, and its burden is shifted to the exchequer.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good thing. And then generally, I look at the stock market. Many people put no faith in stock market. I would not insist, but I would only say that 2 years is a very long period for a stock market to be built on a bubble. Look, this was 35, 40,000. It has shot up to 120.
Right.
So that tells you something about people's sentiment. Look at the investor surveys, OCICC,
Right.
Overseas Chamber,
Yeah.
Gilani Research, they have Ipsos, जो सर्वे करता है,
Right.
all have indicated that there is a turnaround and people are feeling good and are hopeful for the future of the economy. So unlike when there is depression, when there is lack of enthusiasm on the part of investors, I see a very different picture, which is so this budget has consolidated that. Our Asad Sahab, our very standard failure is that the moment we achieve a few months of stability, we say let's go to the picnic, meaning open the imports.
Yeah.
Let them come in. बिकॉज इम्पोर्ट्स की वजह से ग्रोथ बढ़ती है ना, क्योंकि आपकी ओवरऑल रिसोर्स अवेलेबिलिटी बढ़ जाती है. जब आपका करंट अकाउंट डेफिसिट होता है तो ये एडिशनल ये फॉरेन सेविंग्स आ गई, आपकी नेशनल सेविंग्स के साथ मिलकर आपका इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ा देंगे, इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ जाएगा, ग्रोथ बढ़ जाएगी.
राइट.
तो लेकिन क्या होता है कि वो इतना हो जाता है कि वो आपके रिजर्व्स को ईट करना शुरू कर देता है. इतना बड़ा आपका इंपोर्ट, योर इंपोर्ट बिल इज सो लार्ज दैट इट बिगिंस टू ईट योर रिजर्व्स एंड यू डोंट हैव बफर्स. एंड देन द सेम थिंग, गो टू IMF, ask them for a program, ask them for a lifeline. So this pattern is so manifested that it should be no surprise for people to see this cycle keeps repeating itself.
Well, what do you do of the sorry sir, sorry to cut you, but what do you do of the free marketers or the free market fundamentalists in Pakistan or elsewhere, people who adhere to neoliberal policies? They're constantly criticizing the government for this kind of economic or external account management, and they think that, you administer the dollar or you commodify the dollar and then you administer it, And they think that that sort of brings in some kind of inefficiencies in international trade, and then it brings like a deadweight loss. And so many economists in Pakistan, mostly from places like Lums, for instance, I would take the name, have been writing to me, especially when I was at the Ministry of Finance. People used to write to me that, you're managing the dollar, and that would have grave repercussions for the economy. What do you say to that comment, sir?
यार जब IMF का when IMF program is happening,
Right.
then you don't need the libertarians or free market people. उनसे ज़्यादा तो कोई भी नहीं है ना.
Right.
I mean, if our exchange rate management is passing their test,
That's true. There's no bigger test.
yeah. और देखें ना, this is not. Frankly, we need to do more, undoubtedly. But thinking that government has a shop in which it only controls, nobody else, about the foreign exchange, etc. That's not true. We run a phenomenal size of economy, and that process is going on since 1988. Again, I would remind you.
Were you at the Ministry of Finance then, sir, or you joined later?
Later. I came in 93. Now, so we now, we have signed Article 5 of IMF, which is current account convertibility.
Right.
So for the purpose of trade, whoever will come and ask for dollars, State Bank is bound to provide. Even if he's saying that I'm purchasing a beautiful boat somewhere, $300 million boat I want to purchase, they have to provide.
If they have the dollars in the coffers, right? If they have dollar availability, only then.
But I'm saying that the only occasion when we don't have this thing is that we have to rush to IMF. Otherwise, we do. Look, our trade size, our $40 billion of remittances, and nearly 35-40 billion worth of exports going forward. So you have $80 billion in your coffers. They are coming. Here comes an export receipt, there comes an import demand, and you are meeting them. Is there any bar? Remember, you would recall that period of April to July of 23. April पिछले साल का और उसमें बाकी नहीं सॉरी अप्रैल जुलाई है नो कॉन्फिडेंस के बाद the period from April to
July 2022, sir.
July 2022, and it spilled to 23 also.
Right.
Yeah. For 6 months or so. Now, first time ever, Ministry of Commerce put a ban on any import without its prior approval.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously are much younger, you would not have seen. I mean, when we grew up in our awareness, every damn thing could be imported only after getting a license from Ministry of Commerce. So, a huge reversal of our economy when we asked people to, you cannot get a license from. Then State Bank Committee was doing it. But as soon as fund program was approved, that gone. Now today, there is no such restriction. There is no such restriction. So I don't know what are they talking. Also, the State Bank is supported by government for all the foreign exchange that I bring through IMF program, through World Bank program, through ADB program, through bonds, IDB, and you name it. All those dollars I go and give it to State Bank of Pakistan, and they form part of the reserves, and they are being given to importers as per their demands. So, labeling this system as a system in which there is full control of the government, that's not justifiable.
We're nearing the end of the show, sir. I'll ask you my last question and you could quickly respond it. You've also seen this process of formulating the Pakistan Economic Survey. So the economic survey also came out. One thing I'd like to understand, and I know that there's not much clarity about it, is the kind of connection between the federal budget and the Pakistan Economic Survey. How are sort of numbers translated, and how are the do you think that the budget has a role in the kind of projections that are made in the Pakistan Economic Survey? How are the budgetary numbers translated? And one is that there is a lot of optimism expressed in the Pakistan Economic Survey, like you also said. But I know that consumers generally in the surveys that have come out from these survey agencies, consumers are generally optimistic about the Pakistan economy. But I want to hear your opinion, sir. Do you think that, large-scale manufacturing and agriculture sector, the real productive sectors were not growing last year, but now the government has projections in excess of 4% for the next fiscal year. So do you think that Pakistan economy is now, I mean, externally we're doing well, like you said, remittances have grown, exports have grown. We also had like a primary surplus at the start of this year. But the internal sector, the real productive sectors, large scale manufacturing, agriculture, do you think that we should expect them to also grow in the next year? And do you see stability coming into the economy, at least in the medium term, next 2-3 years, perhaps?
Well, I will be very keen that the recession in our domestic production, especially in agriculture,
Right.
that should be restored. Okay.
Yeah.
There were special circumstances last year. There is some missteps in wheat pricing, and that created uncertainty. And uncertainty, as you can see, what is happening in America, everywhere they say that we cannot make a decision about future investments because the policies are changing on a daily basis.
Right.
So that contributed, and because of that, people suffered. I mean, the producers suffered a great deal, and they did not do well accordingly because they felt terrible about government policy. So hopefully, and then the water availability was also low. This time, although this time is also, it is said that rainfall would be less than normal or average rainfall. So let's see about this thing. So if we get, Asad, please understand, like in agriculture, if outputs were not showing any growth, okay, But the capacity is there.
Hmm.
The capacity is there. Some lands will not have either made full production, or they would have been left vacant.
Hmm.
So the farmer felt that it's not worth for me to invest in full leaf production. Now, the excess capacity in your large scale manufacturing is so evident. Automobile sector, and there are many other sectors, fertilizer. eh. Fertilizer, obviously, you did not produce as much as you had thought because the demand was not there. So, automobile sector is a huge uh, sector which is operating below its capacity. So, the large scale industry in general is showing this trend. So, I don't see any reason why they will not bounce back. And then 4% growth is not something which would, uh, I mean, break the apple cart. Because remember, if you go for too much growth, then you slip because you don't have reserves to support the level of imports that you want to bring in. So, 4%, the investment requirements are justified within the present milieu of how economic activities are going. So, the best thing that is happening, frankly, I mean, this has been our bread and butter, fiscal consolidation. And finally, you see 2.3% or 2.7% of primary deficit is just too good. Okay? And then revenue growth is too good. There was a 31% growth in 23-24 in revenues, FBR revenues. It's still 26, 29, 26.7% this year also. So on top of that, so your tax to GDP ratio is also rising. And your, if expansion is not happening, look at your debt to GDP ratio is falling, especially in the foreign debt. So Pakistan, whenever it decides to go to the international market, people will be too happy to oblige, realizing that we have such low exposure in foreign debt market.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
On a lighter note, I wanted to finish with like a quick question, um, which is a personal question, and you could choose not to answer it. But I'm very intrigued, and I think my audience would want to learn this. When I joined the Federal Secretariat, people used to say you were, finance secretary at that time, and I was a junior officer. We used to talk about you a lot, and people used to say that you were hired by Benazir Bhutto, who was really impressed by your skills, and then you worked with various prime ministers and finance ministers. If you'd like to answer this one, were you really hired by Benazir Bhutto, and what was your experience with her, and who, in your opinion, was the finance minister you enjoyed working with the most? But you could choose not to answer it if you don't want to.
No, I mean, that is true. Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto was the one who inducted me in service, and it was a remarkable privilege to have started my career in government with her. But then, Alhamdulillah, I had opportunities to work with other prime ministers also, and the most important was Musharraf Saab and Shaukat Aziz, and Alhamdulillah, it's a very fulfilling experience that Allah Ta'ala gave to me.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between an economic manager and people who like to call them economists. I think there's a very, very thin line. But, anyways, thank you so much for joining, sir, and for all those years of service to Pakistan. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah. Thank you. MashaAllah.